So I'm going to just give you a couple of examples of applying the science, the neuroscience, that are sort of at your level of responsibility. So you can see that application isn't all about working with an individual customer or client. So one is in our temporary aid to needy families. Our Work First is the name of our welfare reform efforts in Washington. And we got to the place where it was pretty clear from the data that we had some people that were complying with absolutely everything that was required of them and still getting to the 60-month limit. We've now changed it to 45-month limit, where you lose all of your ability to get financial benefits for the rest of your life, which affects the children tremendously. And so we began to run the numbers. My colleagues, my office didn't do this, but colleagues began to run the numbers and look at who is it that is hitting this 60-month limit, even though they're complying with every requirement of the Work First program. And what they found was that those were people that had a set of challenges in their lives which you might recognize. They had higher diabetes levels, they had higher cancer levels, they had higher experience with domestic violence levels, they had lower education levels. And you could read the population characteristics like they read, like those ACE attributable problem lists. The legislature decided we don't really need to know their ACE scores. We can see that all of these ACE attributable problems are high in this population. We're probably working with a population that has had a lot of adversity in their lives. And so what they did was they thought it's probably from a public policy standpoint more important that we interrupt the intergenerational transmission of ACEs than that we get those women right back to work, since getting them back to work has failed for 60 months. And so they changed the regulations so that participating in parenting programs and in Head Start parent groups and those kinds of activities count as work. So that women who have experienced a lot of adversity and have these co-occurring challenges in their lives can focus on parenting as work and not lose their financial benefits. A huge investment in Washington State has been very, very good for those families. We also changed our child care subsidy system. Our subsidy system used to require that parents re-qualified for child care subsidy every 6 months. And when there were little bounces in more money, less money, more money, less money, children would be kicked out of their subsidized child care and then have to find new care. So we were getting no stability in the care of children, especially from families where the parents had high ACE scores. And we realized that that wasn't good for intergenerational transmission. And so regulations were changed so that child care subsidy is just reauthorized yearly, and we're still discussing whether it should be every other year. How much does the stability in care matter for interrupting intergenerational transmission? We also changed alternative sentencing. We were able to run the numbers on what the effects of having an incarcerated parent had been on adults who reported that when they were children they had an incarcerated parent. And that led to a deeper understanding of the intergenerational transmission that occurs because of our public incarceration policies. We wanted to be, as a state, tough on crime, but in being tough on crime, we were also inadvertently increasing the ACE scores of the next generation. So our legislators chose to change the policy to allow alternative sentencing for nonviolent offenses of, in this case they chose moms, so that moms still have to do all of their time, but they can do their time with an ankle bracelet at home or with another alternative sentence. They don't have to leave their families and spend time in prison. Their families have less interruption. And in the sentencing, the judge can choose to add some structure to learning more about parenting, to learning more about ACEs, etc., so that we end up with stronger supports for parents who otherwise might have the kinds of stress in their lives that would cause them to pass more ACEs on to their children. We also have new sentences in our payor system, our Medicaid payor system, so that the large HMOs that are the payors in our state are now required by state contract to provide education to about ACEs and NEAR to every primary care provider in the state. We're hoping that that will just infuse this knowledge into those relationships, in those environments, and also help the staff in those primary care environments rethink the kind of safety, the emotional safety that's present on site in those clinics and care provider offices, because that's one of the most important ways that we shift is we reduce the kind of stress that's perceived as danger in people's lives. So those are some examples. And from there, what I'd like to ask you to do is to think for a moment and then at your tables have a discussion about one of those population groups. So choose some population or group to think about, to focus on for your conversation, because it can just get too big if you try to think about everyone all at once. So you might choose employees, or you might choose customers of the kind of service that's about compliance, or customers about this kind of services that are just about transaction, like economics assistance, et cetera. Or you might choose contractors or providers, et cetera. And I'd just like you to take about 12 minutes to talk about these questions. In what ways are our policies or services already designed to accommodate? What do we want to make sure we hold on to, we keep? And then what current initiatives might be more impactful if it were informed by these concepts? So I'll give you about 12 minutes.
I think it was something that Ginny here said that I want to give credit where credit is due, is that thinking in this way can be really difficult, that thinking about trauma and this holistic approach, it may bring up trauma in yourself, and that's hard to do, but I think sometimes doing what's easiest is not always best. Like we have our heuristics, we have things to make it easier for ourselves, but usually there's a lot more going on under the surface, and it takes a shift in thinking that I just think is so important.
Anybody else? That's one of the biggest challenges, is to think differently. Oh!
If you follow this through and extrapolate, you just undercut a whole lot of behavior change-oriented programs and their funding streams and the core assumptions they're tied to.
It really suggests some new paradigms, right? And that can be not only uncomfortable, but requires a different kind of leadership. And I actually, you can tell I crammed too many slides in, but I even had more last night because I had a whole section on working in a paradigm shift. That's a whole nother day we could spend together about navigating leadership when we're working in a period of time where there are some paradigms that are challenged, some whole ways of thinking, some frameworks for funding and programming and evidence-based practice that are challenged by this science. And whole new ways of thinking are coming into being as we discover more and more about the dynamics of how experience influences life course, intergenerational patterns. And so I think just keeping the conversation open and helping each other challenge, is that the only way we could think about that? Are there some other ways? That's pretty healthy when we're living in a time where thinking is changing because the science is changing, our understanding is changing. Okay, so I'm going to breeze through a little bit now. We're going to turn from so much about adversity to a little bit more about what helps. So I mentioned these three core protective systems, and that I'm going to get some water as I'm talking here so I don't start coughing things, or coffee, or whatever's in there. Is there anything in there? Dan's going to get me something, yay. And I think the thing to keep in mind is that we make these big investments in capabilities, and yet capabilities may require some accommodations or some new ways of thinking or some new ways of helping to shore up and build these kinds of capabilities in people. But if we're nurturing this full array, capabilities plus belonging plus community, we have our best odds at developing resilience in the adult population. And I believe our most powerful strategy is to build the skills, abilities, and community around the adults, because they're the ones that will be powerful for preventing ACEs in the next generation. So even though the study is called the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, I think a focus on adults is warranted, because it's adults that will prevent ACEs in the next generation, and we need to support them and retool their capabilities and their attachments so they can do that work. So in the resilience literature, there's a lot about having a positive view. There's a lot about self-regulation, about efficacy, and knowing that I am an agent in my own life. All of these are affected by trauma during development. And so all of these may need some extra supports around them in order for people to stand very clearly in that space. I was once facilitating a 3-day, which I prefer longer sessions with groups, because we can go deeper and make more meaning from this science. And I did a 3-day session that included some tribal elders from one of our tribal nations in Washington. And we did a whole section on resilience and what we personally rely on in order to build more strength in our lives. And at the end of it, one of the elders came up to me and said, "I would like to say something to the group." Yes, of course. And she said, "When you were talking about what you relied on during the tough times in your life, I could see that you felt joy. You felt happy remembering that you relied on some of these things for strength and resilience building. I didn't feel any joy." And I think it's important for all of you to understand that when you talk about resilience, some of us don't have a well of joy that we reach into. We want for our people just as much as you do, but we don't physiologically have a sense of joy. That's something that's been stolen from us. So when I see in the literature positive view, I remember that tribal elder and the importance of her statement that we can't prejudge for other people what gives them a sense of strength in their lives, what gives them a sense that they're going to pass on something better for their children and their grandchildren. We have to listen to what their life experience is. And so I really encourage us when we see the lists of capabilities in the literature that we not think of capabilities just in terms of a list, but really more in terms of deep relationships in which it's safe to hear that tribal elder say, I don't get to experience that, but what I do want to do is contribute to my people. So you can help me do that. And I think that's important. The literature on resilience has a very strong orientation toward capabilities, as if all of us could develop the whole list at any time. And that may not be true. We may develop different capabilities from one another, and that's probably okay. The second is there's a lot of strength in the literature around relationships and attachment. And lots of people know the saying, if you just have one caring adult, you'll be a lot better. But the literature actually says caring and competent. And I would suggest that this neuroscience and epigenetics and the ACE study itself is telling us that we need some new competencies as professionals, as parents, as adults who live in the world and want to protect children. We need to learn this science and develop new competencies for creating safe spaces, for organizing even something as simple as how seating is arranged in a room or how a new employee sits in their cubicle. We need some new competencies so that we can work with people who maybe don't experience joy or who have profound mental illness as a result of the trauma in their lives. Each of those individuals still has core gifts to give to the state of Montana, and we have to have the competencies to create the space for that giving to occur. And I talk about that from a very personal level as well as my professional training, because I have a sister with serious and persistent mental illness who experiences tremendous amounts of terror in her life. And our family has had to develop competencies, and many times they're so hard. And I can't tell you how many days of my life I've just been so challenged by how to be with my sister in a way that improves the quality of her existence in the midst of her terror. But what I can tell you is that my daughter, who's now in her early 30s, who grew up with her auntie, she's fluent. She doesn't have to work nearly as hard as I do. She just has the competences with her auntie. She can draw her out. She can safely transport her, even in the most scary times. She can send the right card at the right moment. She can create around her all of the adults knowing when to use hand gestures and when it would frighten auntie. She's competent in ways I never dreamed of because she grew up developing those competencies in a family that was committed to learning about them. So I think as we build these, it's going to get easier. And that comes from my personal experience, but also from my professional training. Once we become fluent with a new set of competencies, it will be a lot easier to generate attachment and belonging for every person, even the people like my sister, who really are not that easy to be attached to. She's sometimes kind of hard. But she has a solid social network around her because of the commitment to create that space for it. So both Dr. Anda and I believe that really the trick to working with this new science is to dedicate ourselves to this notion of self-healing communities. The people most affected by ACEs need to lead. They're the ones with the experience. They're the ones with the most knowledge. They're people who can step up and want to step up, but they're often relegated to a position of having to receive from services, having to receive in many ways. Over and over and over, parents with very high ACE scores said, but I want to help solve this. I don't want to just be the benefit of a program. I want to be a leader in my community. And with support, people all over this country are stepping up to lead in really unusual and amazing ways, developing peer systems for support that are having big impacts and helping to reduce the rates of major social problems rapidly in communities. So investing in populations that are most affected by ACEs and helping them to influence our systems, I think that's a pathway to consider. Cultural relevance, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that all of these resilience factors are built in the context of culture. And in order to truly invest in resilience, we have to truly be informed by the cultural differences in a state and allow for those differences to emerge in our strategies and our policies and the ways that we build self-healing communities. So I'm going to work through a set of slides very rapidly. This is brand new data. It comes from the state of Washington from a nonprofit called the Foundation for Healthy Generations that I work with part-time. And I oversee the state's analysis of our ACE and resilience data in that role. And what we've done is collect resilience-related data from adults in the population to look at 4 factors. Support, feeling socially, emotionally supported, having 2 or more people that will show up, physically show up and help, not on Facebook. They'll actually arrive and help you in your life. Something called community reciprocity. We have a cluster of questions through factor analysis. We determined there was a cluster of questions that are good proxy for how people are relating to one another, whether there's favors being done among a social circle, whether they're watching out for children, whether adults can be counted on to intervene if kids are in trouble. And then the last one is social bridging. And social bridging is the hardest kind of social capital to build. And the best way for me to explain it is just to tell you the question. Think about the circle of people that you rely on for help and support in your life. How common is it for one of you to reach outside that circle to someone you don't know well to bring help into the circle for one of your friends? So social bridging is so important because in a circle of people, all of whom have high ACE scores and high ACE effects, at any given time there could be no one with a lot of resource to be the peer helper. But if it's a norm to reach outside that group and get help and bring it in, then you're weaving the strengths across those social groups in a community or a state and building social capital that has real staying power and can help groups that have high ACE scores. So I'm going to show you a few charts on feeling socially, emotionally supported. I'll breeze through them very quickly once I explain the first two slides. These are in 2 slide sets. So this first one is along the bottom are ACE scores, and this vertical axis, the percentage of the population with poor physical health more than half of the last month. So these are the people that had low scores on support and hope, and you can see this dose-response relationship to ACEs. The higher the ACE score, the higher the poor physical health reported. But what about people who have more support and hope? You see, we still see the dose-response relationship with ACEs, but a much lower percentage of the population with poor physical health. So what about activity limitation? We see higher the ACE score, the higher the activity limitation, but with support, social emotional support, you see this big drop in the population. This is mental health, sorry. More than half of the last month, and you see this big drop. This is ability to work. I apologize, these slides are going off the sheet for some reason. Ability to work, this isn't whether they're unemployed, this is whether people report they're unable to work. And you see this huge drop in the percentage of population. Let's look at 2 or more people. So once neighborhoods see this data, they say, well, we could self-organize so that every single person in our town or our neighborhood or our city has at least 2 people who will show up and help. It doesn't matter if they're easy people to help or hard people to help. We can make sure 2 or more people will show up. And I'll show you why they say that. Hunger. We would expect hunger to get better because people might bring food, right? Not surprised by that. But what about diabetes? Or depression? Oops. So depression. This is the Kessler score of mental health symptoms. So they might still have a mental illness diagnosis, but look at the rate of problems with symptoms go down. And poor physical health, huge drops. We see the same with ability to work, etc. And these community level resiliencies about reciprocity and social bridging, I don't have charts and graphs for them yet. We're still working out the statistical methods for looking from a community standpoint. But I can tell you that communities with high rates of those have better rates of both health status and health behaviors. So health behaviors like having a primary care physician, getting enough exercise, not over drinking, etc. We see in these kind of social norms. And we also see better rates of children's academics in communities with these higher social capital. So I want to give you a few moments right now to, what I want you to give you is just a few minutes to write, personally write, and there's some sheets of paper. And you can put your name on it, but you don't have to. There's not any reason. What I'd like you to do is just write for about 4 minutes here about this question. And I'm going to ask you to turn that writing in, so it won't be labeled to you, but I want to get a sense of the whole. I'll type that up and make it available back to you so you can see the collective thinking from this amazing group we have today. So given my sphere of influence, what ideas do I have for putting this knowledge to work? And I've just put some examples of things that might be in your sphere of influence. You can ignore them. Just write, just stream of consciousness, about 4 minutes. What ideas do I have for putting this knowledge to work? I'm going to invite Kathy and Dan and Leslie up. They're educators that are amazing resources for the state and for your department. And I wanted to ask them to give you some examples of the kinds of things they're hearing from across the state and from inside the department around this same question. So you get your own thinking, but you also get a sense of what's coming up for other people. So Dan and Kathy and Leslie. I think Dan's going first.
So that's great, thank you, Laura. So one of the first things I wanted to do is really publicly thank Director Hopper for taking leadership in this. I really think you're really helping us become a more trauma-informed agency, and I just really appreciate it, and I'm all excited about it. I actually did child protection for about 5 years in Billings, and then was a direct provider of services to families and youth in their homes for the last 20 years, actually for 20 years, and then the last 3 years I've been at the state and got this opportunity to do this training, and it's been really, really rewarding. People are excited. All the employees we talk to, they're just excited and pumped and already know something about ACEs and know something about trauma. I know for me what this ACEs training did in the presentations really reinforces what I already knew. And this was just a wonderful, great training that kind of packaged it in a way that all of us could really, I think, understand and kind of get on board with. Anyway, the two things I wanted to let people know before I talk about what the employees from the Developmental Services Division kind of identified, based on the same question that you guys got, is some of us are already doing a lot of the, are using some ACEs in our programs already. The Children's Mental Health Bureau, where I work, and also the Department of Family Services, is doing a CANS functional assessment tool that uses, one of the domains is based on the ACE study. So we're capturing some of the information on youth and how they've been, what ACE experiences they've had as younger folks. We're capturing that within some of the mental health services that we offer. But again, was really happy that I think one of the things that Vicki did is she gave people and put this SAMHSA concepts of trauma and guidance for a trauma-informed approach on your tables. And one of the reasons I want to point that out is that one of the things that a lot of the employees, when they were giving examples, they gave examples of those groupings that are in there. So we're already doing some of the trauma-informed work as a trauma-informed agency. But some ideas that they came up with were really kind of simple ideas. It could be something as simple as the case managers completing a social history to be able to identify members with high ACE scores, and then develop cost plans that can be tailored around that knowledge. Apparently we have not had case managers do social histories anymore, but they said that's something we'd like to do again. They'd like to develop support groups for the folks they work with. They talked about the importance of training staff as well as providers of the services we manage. So lots of people were saying, well, how can we train the providers who provide the services we are trying to help our folks get? Another thing was current programs don't always operate on a preventive basis. Another idea was consider funding for youth with high ACEs without a strict diagnostic criteria of PTSD, as that's harder for youth to have that criteria met. And then the information is not just meaningful for our work lives. They talked about that they would like to learn self-care to be able to help others. They talked about educating family members, especially our children, regarding the normalcy of adaptive behaviors. And then incorporating the information on ACEs into our parenting. So I thought all of those are really good. One of the last trainings I did was with Peg Shea through AMDD, and we did it over at the Montana Chemical Dependency Center. And they decided that they're going to do 3 trainings, starting with the ACEs training, and then they're going to move on to having that institution become a trauma-informed agency. And then they're going to talk about wellness. So they identified already that they want to do 3 distinct trainings. And so really, people are excited. I spent 45 minutes talking with 2 people when we were having cake for a birthday celebration, and they heard that I was starting to do this Master ACE training. And they said, what can we do? And they talked to me for 45 minutes being that excited about it. And I said, I'm happy to train you. So again, they already knew, but they're just getting really excited. Thank you.
I'm probably too short to stand behind that, but my name is Leslie Lee. I'm the program coordinator with Maternal and Early Childhood Home Visiting over in the Public Health and Safety Division. And I, like Daniel, I've been doing this work in early childhood for a while before I came to public health. So this is everything that I knew and I saw in the kiddos that I was working with, and in the families and in the home visiting and all that. But this gives great language to be able to train on that. So one of the things I just wanted to highlight that's happening in our state is that we are having what's called the Great Beginnings, Great Families Conference. It's the 3rd annual conference, and it's supported through maternal, infant, and early childhood home visiting funding and Healthy Montana Teen Parent program funding. And that is July 7th, 8th, and 9th. We have the governor speaking, we have Director Opper speaking, and we also have 2 keynote speakers, Dr. Donna Beagle, who was there last year, who's going to be talking a lot about trauma and poverty from her own personal perspective, and then more globally. And then we also have Dr. Clayton Small with Native Pride, and he'll be talking, the title is Resilience in Fatherhood, Healing from Childhood Trauma and Moving Forward as Healthy Parents and Families. And he'll also offer some sessions too. So we do also have Todd Garrison, who is with Childwise, presenting on ACEs. And so I thought it was noteworthy to mention this conference because we did a call for proposals, not expecting, not knowing what we would get, and it turned into an informal theme of trauma-informed practices and resiliency and care. So it's targeted for anyone that's working with young children, vulnerable families, social workers, home visitors, the list goes on and on, early childhood professionals. So I just wanted to highlight that one thing. So thank you.
I might be able to stand back behind here. We'll see. I might be tall enough. I'm Kathy Rich, and I'm with the Early Childhood Services Bureau, relatively new to the state, and like Dan and Leslie, kind of come in with a background in social work and working with families and children, and seeing really how applicable all this ACEs information is, and feel very grateful to be able to be in the place to work with it. I'm going to be talking a little bit about just what's happening around the state and kind of going from an early childhood lens, a more macro lens, and some of the things that are really going on. This is going on everywhere around the state, really a movement around trauma-informed care, and it's been happening really quite widely. So in the Early Childhood Services Bureau, and I know across DPHHS, we're really trying to coordinate with other entities around the state. So Billings received a very large grant called a de-stress grant that's through their healthcare system, which is really all about trauma-informed care. We're really trying to coordinate and work closely with them in terms of what they're doing. And they're really kind of ahead of the curve around trauma-informed care. Their community has been working on it for 10, 15 years. So we're going to be working with them to really help mentor some other communities as well. The Bozeman schools also received a very large, a very large trauma-informed care, and DPHHS, through several different divisions, received a launch grant. A launch grant is working with really early childhood mental health, but we're going to work together with the Bozeman schools and see if we can really share data and work together around trauma-informed care. So those are some really nice bringing of things together. There's been work done to really embed ACEs into some of the policies within the state. OPI has had new standards around preschool and some other areas around teacher preparation, and work was done to embed that language in there, and that was accepted. We're going to be developing a statewide toolkit for trauma-informed care for early childhood, and we also have a preschool development grant that I think that a lot of you have probably heard about. ACEs is embedded in the training for all of the teachers and staff that are going to be involved in that grant. So there is just amazing things really happening around the state. There are 3 of us who are trained as master trainers for DPHHS, But within the master training, there is also 20 other people who are trained all the way across the state. So we've also been using that cadre of trainers to support the ACEs work that's being done all over the state. So thank you. I'm going to turn it back to Laura.
So the odds are, wherever you have a need in the state for a local person that could do education about neuroscience, epigenetics, ACEs, and resilience, you probably can reach through these three or through ChildWise to those trainers across the state, because there are over 20 that Rob Anda and myself and one other educator came and worked with, and they're ready to teach and train and also facilitate dialogue about what next steps folks might want to take in their communities and in their local systems. So we talk about trauma-informed care, and I think one of the things I want to mention here is that we reach to the whole field of trauma-informed care because it exists. The ACE study includes trauma and chronic adversity, and we know that chronic adversity wears on people and people adapt to it as well. But as this science was emerging, one of the most well-developed disciplines for us to reach to for solutions was coming out of the trauma-informed care from psychiatric hospitals and other kinds of deep-end treatment environments. And the discoveries on those environments are really important ways to help us shape a better care that will help people have more resilience as adults in their lives. And so a trauma-informed approach includes realizing the prevalence of trauma and adversity in a population. Some of you are managing data. Learning to recognize the signs that there's high prevalence in a population is really an important new way of thinking about using data. Recognizing how trauma and adversity affects people. That's why I spent so much time today on neuroscience and epigenetics, and would spend even more time with you on that in my talk. And all of these trainers are trained to spend some time with that, because we need to understand how people are adapting in order to put great accommodations and preventive strategies into place. We need to really be conscious about resisting re-traumatization, which can easily be occurring in people's lives, and also responding by putting these pieces of knowledge into practice and testing and measuring and in an iterative way make systematic improvements. I've included the core principles of trauma-informed care, and they're really well articulated in SAMHSA's guidance, and I think that'll be a next step for you to really delve more deeply into what do you mean by trauma-informed care. It might look different in different systems, but these principles can exist all the way from if you're giving cash assistance to making an arrest on the street, creating safety, trustworthiness, prioritizing choice and control. These are principles that can exist in every realm in which we work. So Dr. Martin Luther King said in his speech actually in Britain right before he won the Nobel Prize that there's nothing more dangerous than to build a society with a segment of society with no stake in society. And I think that is something we need to keep in mind as we're thinking about where is the locus of change. Those people affected by ACEs, yes, they might have more challenges in their lives. They might have a history that makes things more difficult for them. But that history is created because we as a society have turned our backs on tragic circumstances that are happening in the lives of families over generations. Our policies of segmentation, the fact that we kick kids out of school instead of in-school suspension, the fact that we don't yet have personnel policies that fully embrace the ways that people have biologically adapted to stress and trauma, etc. These are factors that lead to people with high ACE scores being separated, experiencing social isolation in our culture. And Dr. King was talking about race segregation. I'm talking about ACE segregation. But nevertheless, I think his statement is really important. And that is, it's torturous logic to use the tragic results of the progression of adversity to justify continuation of it. And that's where our leadership comes in. We're going to be the ones that interrupt that transmission of trauma generation to generation. We're going to be the ones innovating and generating new solutions. And as I'm getting closer to wrap up, I want to just tell you a brief story from a woman who came from the Congo. I was teaching a 6-hour set of education for a group of leaders in Oregon. And I was talking about creating safety in all of its forms. And I was talking about having at least 2 people that will show up and help that you feel safe with. And the woman at the back of the room was standing with her back to the wall, which tells me something about safety. I don't want anyone behind me. Does that make sense? She raised her hand and she said, what if there would be nobody who would show up? And I wouldn't want them to. It would be too frightening. And I said, tell me more about that. And she went on to explain that she's a recent immigrant from the Congo. And as she talked about her experience of being in the United States, where no one looks like her, the culture is so foreign. And I realized that I didn't have any expertise to offer her. She had all the expertise to offer me and the room. So I asked her if she would host one of the dialogues in the afternoon, and she agreed to do that. And the dialogue that she hosted was about how do we have 2 people that will show up and help when no one feels safe? And we sat at the table and I asked her, when you came from the Congo, did you have a dream of something that it would be like to come to America? And she said, yes, my children and I would all be dead if we had stayed in the Congo. And I did have a dream about what it would be to come to America. What was that dream? She said, I would fling the doors open and my children could run outside and play and they would laugh with the other children and be safe. She said, I could be real and I could walk up to someone and I could say hello, and they would say hello and they would say, how are you? And I wouldn't have to just say, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, like you people do here. And I would have a feeling of community. I would have a belonging. And I could go to the grocery store knowing that my children wouldn't be arrested for being black. And in our little discussion, we all got tears, because don't we all have dreams like that? And we don't create safe enough spaces to remember. So listening and affirming and having the discussions and then remembering what our real dreams are, there's a lot of power in that. And I want you to remember her coming from the Congo, reminding us about how we really want to be as a people in Montana, in Oregon, any place across our country. Don't we all want all of this? So with that, I'm going to bring Vicki up, and Vicki's going to talk about resources for you, and I'm probably going to have to flash through a couple of, there we go, resources for you. And your writing that you've done, I want you to leave it at the table. I'll pick it up and type it up, and you're welcome to stay and do a little more writing if something has sparked your imagination and you'd like it to show up, because that'll be sort of the documentation from today. But there are resources available to you as leaders that can help you take next steps with trauma-informed care, with ACE and near education, and with your work.
Thank you, Laura. I'd like to just express my appreciation for coming to Montana and doing a deep dive really fast into a very complex topic. So thank you, Laura Porter, for coming to Montana. Appreciate it. So like you, I'm sitting in the audience going, oh, wow, okay, now what do we do? What's next? We can't just pull this off the shelf and implement it and away we go. This next step requires some strategic thinking and strategic planning in each of our divisions and programs. And they might all look a little bit different across the agency because of the nature of the work that you do every day. Some of you are run divisions that have programs and service provision. Other of you are behind the scenes and doing the leadership from the back of the room with the fiscal management, or out in front talking to advocates and so forth. So I mean, it's really going to be up to you and how you operate in your division on how you move this through. You're probably walking away going, okay, we didn't come back. We're not leaving here with the answer. But you have all the tools. So our main tools are our 3 master trainers here. Dan, Leslie, and Kathy have begun doing training in their own host divisions and have really tried to harness some good ideas and some spark on how do we move this forward, because this is new and it's different. We're kind of trying some new science out. From that, all of you division administrators have been asked to submit facilitator names to me of key staff in your divisions who might be that go-to person. And many of you have asked, well, how much time is that going to take? Is it going to be a huge burden of commitment? And again, that's going to depend on your division. What we'd like to have is a resident expert, or 2 or 3 or 4 or more, depending on the size of your division, on who can be a keeper of information and resources that can be the conduit to the master trainers. We're looking for somebody who can do a mini ACEs training, maybe that takes 30 minutes to do. Somebody who can attend a few trainings and meetings so we can give you tools and help facilitate the movement of training in your division. So if you haven't submitted those names to me, I do need those. I've got quite a few. Some folks have changed. I've had staff call me and say, hey, I'd like to be one of those people. And I'm referring back to the bureau chief, section supervisor, bureau chief, and administrator to make sure that that person has the time and you have the support to make this happen. So all divisions we're looking for that piece. I'd like to have those names by the end of this month. We would like to have a meeting and probably a 2-hour mini training get together, figure out the next steps sometime over the probably June, maybe in June. And we do have some divisions who are identifying facilitators outside of Helena. So for example, Local Rehab's identified someone in their staff out of a Billings office. Another office out of Glasgow has identified someone. And we have technology, we have WebEx. So let's use it and engage people in those ways. Also on the Moodle, there are a ton of really great resources. Even today I was getting phone calls on how do I access the Moodle. You all have Moodle on your desktop. I didn't know it was there until about 3 months ago. And now I know how to get on it. But there are a ton of really great resources this through. A couple of really key resources in that Moodle are, we have a license through Child and Family Services to use the Dr. Folletti videos. I think Dr. Anderson, are you in them? I think Laura, no. Are in them, are in the videos, and they're very short snippets. They're anywhere from 10 minutes to 20 minutes on the ACE study and how the ACE study is being used to inform reducing domestic violence, sexual violence, and so forth. And to get to those videos, you have to go through the Moodle. So they're not out there because we've purchased the license. Also on our Moodle, we have permission from Dr. Karingi. He's here in Montana, he's over in Missoula, and he's a nationally known, is he a psychiatrist? He's on secondary trauma, social worker. And he works in the School for Social Work at U of M. We have permission to use a recent training that he did over in Missoula. It's about an hour long on how to reduce secondary trauma. And it really will play well into the workplace. So that is on the Moodle. Again, you have to go through the Moodle to get there because we have his permission. It's not public domain. Also on there are links to Laura's work on ACE Interface, the CDC, the Children's Mental Health, training in TA, modules through, lost it. It's a big school. Where's Zoe? Who is that? The training in TA for children's mental health. It's not Harvard, it's Georgetown, thank you. Those resources are there, a link to them. Yes, Roy?
What about the folks in the room that are not with our agency? They have access to the tools you were talking about.
I can get them access. We'll get them access. We have their emails. I think we can set them up on the Moodle, can't we? We'll figure that out and get information back out. Yeah. We have your email, so we'll communicate to you on how to access that information. Thank you, that's a good question. Also on the Moodle is Dr. Nadine Harris's TED Talk. She's really exciting as well. So the next steps on my list, we'd like to have the names of your facilitators to me by the end of the month. We will set up a time to get them together with the master trainers. We'll get a plan and some curriculum. Also, they'll have access to all the training resources that our master trainers do. And then also Dan and Leslie and Kathy are beginning to broaden their training scope. And through the Moodle, there will be, when they're out doing some training outside of their agency and starting to get some of those skill sets built, there's a training calendar on the Moodle. So go look, or you can contact them directly to see if that would work. They still also have their regular jobs to do, so we have to kind of not push them out there and say, okay, they're 24/7 ACE trainers. Also, we're hoping the facilitators will shadow these guys when they go out and do some training. So that will take some time. And then finally, the next step for us will be the trauma-informed piece. So figuring that piece out. So we are planning as we are going, because it is a new trail. To wrap up for the day, on the table are some evaluations. Again, we took a very deep dive, very quick, into some information. Your head may be swimming, but we do take into consideration your feedback. Please take the resources with you that are on the table. Again, these are also all in the Moodle. And then Kathy Rich's grant that she spoke about earlier also has helped pay to rent the room, which included the coffee, which is a big deal, as you all know, and to pay for Laura to come in. So just a round of applause for that effort. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts they want to share as we wrap up? So from here, Laura will take what we learned today, and what we learned from tomorrow's group, and she'll create a report that will go back to Richard, which will come back to all of us. And as we move forward, this information will be incorporated into decision making. Thank you, everybody, for coming.